Alright, so I'm going to teach you guys how to do some color stuff. I'm calling it Stylized Vintage, and it's not necessarily super vintage because it's not one of those things you see on Instagram where some filter that makes it go crazy, and it's not a like new looking technique where it looks very digital and stuff like that. So I'm calling it Stylized Vintage. It has nice pastel colors. The blacks are not straight crushed dark pure black. They have more of a mood to them, and by mood I mean they're brown or blue, have more of a feel than a lot of the digital stuff you see out there today. So take this photo and we're gonna try to turn it into this, and I'm gonna go kind of fast because I'm trying to do this under 10 minutes and just trying to show you something real fast. So start by making a curves adjustment, and I'm just going to do your basic adjustment, kind of the base adjustment to start things off. I'm just making a little bit more contrast to this, bringing the midtones, shadows down some, bringing the highlights down some as well. That looks good. And next I'm going to make another new curves adjustment, and we're going to use this just for the sky. And you're going to bring this down, bring midtones down a little bit more, and that looks good. Now I'm going to inverse this mask. You can just paint with black down here, but I like doing the other way, so I'm going to hit Command I, inverse it, use your paintbrush, and paint in the sky there you want to be affected by that particular curves layer. So that looks good. And now this is the stylized part. I don't really know anyone else that's doing this, but for this you're going to be choosing a color, and we're going to be changing the shadows. So like I said before, it's going to be more of a either brown or blue, whatever color you choose. For this one we're going to be choosing a brown, and the brown is going to be a value of brightness anywhere from 20 to about 40, and you'll see in a second why I choose this. And I usually stay around this area. I don't go too saturated, and I don't go just the gray either. You want some color into it, so I'm going to go just right here, and I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to fill this layer, and I'm going to use a shortcut Option Delete, and that fills with the foreground color. If you hit Command Delete, that would fill with the background color. You can hit Shift Delete, and that makes foreground color, background color, whatever color you choose. There's a bunch of ways to do this, but I'm going to use Option Delete. So we're going to fill that. Now we're going to turn the visibility off, and we're going to make a new layer mask, but we're going to make a layer mask with a channel. And if you've never done this before, go ahead and highlight the background layer and go into channels. Now you can see you have the red, green, blue channel. If you've never seen this before, didn't know this existed, this is what your photo is made up of. But we want to make a mask using the red channel for this one, because the green channel looks a little muddy, blue channel looks even more muddy, red has good contrast, nice highlights and shadows. So we're going to take this and we're going to make it a selection. You can do this by command clicking, and you see the marching ants. You know this is a selection now, and you would simply go back into your photo, turn your brown layer back on, and you're going to hit the layer mask, and you can see now we have a layer mask of the red channel. Another way to do this would be to turn this off, and the shortcut is Shift Option Command 3. That loads in the red channel as a selection. You would turn your layer back on, and I'm going to be filling with black because we already have a layer mask out. And you see now this filled it, but now it filled it with the inverse of the red channel. So instead of, this looks like a negative now, old back in the film days. So now the blacks are white and the highlights are black. So with masks, the blacks conceal, white reveals. And so we want to work with the shadows right now, so this is exactly what we want. If your mask looks like this, you want to inverse it. You hit Command I, or go up to Select, Inverse, that's actually Selection. You just hit Command I. Blinking on how to do it the other way. But Command I will flip it, looks like this now. Now we will go back and we're going to take the opacity all the way down, and we're going to slowly start bringing it up. And you want to get to a point where it doesn't look super muddy like that, and you don't want it to where you can't even see it. You want to have, you know, some influence on it. I usually find anywhere between 8 and 30 usually works depending on the photo. It's always different. That's not a set guide. That's more just a guideline of where you want to be at. So I'm gonna go just about here. This looks, you know, good. Turn it on and off, and you'll see it's with it on. With it off, you can see the blacks are now being shifted up to a brown, and they're not as dark as they were. So you'll see in a second why this is good. We're going to make a new layer. Hit Shift Option Command N to make a new layer. And now we're going to be working with the highlights. And we're going to be taking this layer and putting it into the blend mode of overlay. We'll do that in a second, but we want to choose a color to use for the highlights. Since this is sunset, I would say yellow or a brown, red, or even pink is going to work. And since I've already done this photo, I know that I want to use pink, and we saw where we want to take this. So for the highlights, then the shadows, I said anywhere from 20 to 40-ish, depending on the photo, for the brightness. And for the highlights, we're going to choose anywhere from, you know, 50 up to, you know, 80 if you want. But same rule, I wouldn't go too saturated, and I wouldn't go just gray either. Somewhere in the middle, and we're going to choose something like this, or like up there. Okay, choose that, and we're going to hit Option Delete, fill that layer, and we're going to use a red channel mask again. And since we already have one here, we'll select that, Option click and drag, that duplicates it up into the top one. And what's wrong with this is now this mask is still on the shadows, and we want to inverse this so it's working with the highlights. Boom, now you can tell it's working the highlights because all the sky changed, and now it's just this kind of purple lavender looking thing, pinkish lavender I should say. But now we want to take this and move it to the blend mode overlay. And now you can see that it's changed. If you've never worked in blend modes before, you'll should know that overlay and soft light are contrast kind of blend modes, and overlay is more so than soft light. Soft light is a weaker version of overlay, and for this one we're going to be using overlay just because it works. And for other photos, you could dial in the opacity to what you want. For this one, we're just going to leave it at 100, and you're going to see, you know, for this it's adding some contrast, it's changing the luminance value, it's brightening up the highlights, darkening the shadows a tad, not too much, and you can see it's getting some really good colors up in the sky. So this is good, and this is kind of the technique, these two things right here with the red channel masks that I use in a lot of my photos. And this is how I get a lot of the colors that I get, and just that look that you can't really replicate anywhere else. And so that's kind of my secret. And then the final thing for this little trick is to make a new curves adjustment, and we're going to go into the blue channel. And this is the old cross-process technique, where if you guys aren't familiar with the cross-process technique, you throw up the blues and the shadows, and you're going to bring down the yellows and the highlights. And you know, that's a cool stylized effect right there that you can use. And the cross-process will look more like this, where it's a greenish, and that was just because I had the purple layer on, so it was taking a lot of the green out. And this is, you know, a very common cross-process look, and it's looking a little different because we have this brown layer on, so these shadows aren't going to be as contrasty as they would be otherwise. And also we were working with just not having it so it's crushed. So bring this purple layer back on. We're going to change this a tad just so it's not as intense. Somewhere in there. That's cool. And then you can leave it there. That could be your finished product. I'm going to go a little bit further I'm going to make a new curves adjustment and just do some localized curves to bring some contrast back in. So for this one, we'll go into the sky, much like the one we had down there. Bring the highlights up a little bit more. Something like this. We'll Command I that, paint in what we want for the sky. Make sure that looks good. And then we'll make another new curves adjustment to use on the water. And bring this up some. Shadows back down. Contrasts. We'll Command I, make it black. Going to paint in areas we want. And boom. That's kind of that. I'm going to go back into this one. Bring this up a little bit more. Highlights. And cool. So that's the technique I use to do my color stuff. We'll see just how close I got to the other one. So we'll turn that off, turn this on. So this one was a little bit more pink. We went a little bit more yellow with this one. Still cool, still a good technique. And that's how I do a lot of my color.